Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all excited for some more generative AI insights. My name is Santiago Pombo. I am the Director of Product at ThoughtSpot, and the session today is called Product Note Demos, How to Harness the Power of GenAI to Accelerate the Adoption Analytics. If you meant to be here, that's awesome. If you just stumbled in the room, please stick around. We're going to have an action-packed session. So let's start with a little bit of house cleaning. I was meant to be here with my friend Craig, who's the VP of Engineering at CWT, and he was not able to make it. But to make up for it, I will be able to go much deeper into some of these sections and have a Q&A at the end of the session if time's allowed. So the objective of this session is to essentially give you tips on how to productize large language models inside of your organization for BI use cases, and how to assess vendors if you are still not doing it. We're going to do that in 4 ways. The first one is we're going to ask ourselves, are LLMs really production ready today? And we're going to look at some market data. The second part of the conversation is going to be about how we've done this at ThoughtSpot and what our early results look like, what our adoption looks like. Then we're going to get to the bulk of the conversation, which is the tips and the battle-tested insights that we've gotten developing our own technology. And you will be able to use this also to assess vendors. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with 5 takeaways that you can take at home. So just to get started, let's start with an interesting experiment. By show of hands, how many of you are currently using large language models for analytics inside of your companies today, or are planning in the next year? So how many? Okay, about like 20% of the organization. And then how many of you that said yes are using them in production with production data sets? How many? Okay, very few. And that absolutely checks out. So to nobody's surprise, this is a survey done by Snorkel AI, and they essentially surveyed 230 enterprises of different sizes. And 80% of all of those enterprises said that they are planning to use large language models sometime this year. And that's obviously not surprising. There's executives allocating resources, time, and money to making this happen. But what was truly surprising is that even though the API from OpenAI, the ChatGPT API, has been open for a year, only 14% of companies are actually able to deploy those in production. The vast majority of enterprises are still very much experimenting with it. And if we actually go back deeper into the data, we realize that the main blockers today still remain accuracy, governance, and safety. And it makes a lot of sense because large language models are probabilistic systems, right? They're non-deterministic systems. And if you are using those for BI's use cases, it's actually very dangerous to have the problem of hallucinations. Now, what's really interesting, though, is that even though people are still concerned about this, if you notice, poor use case fit is not a blocker. In fact, very few companies report not seeing LLMs and not seeing their potential for their use case. So, for the BI space, the big promise of large language models is finally unlocking adoption. As you guys know, many of you are data professionals. The field and the industry overall has done incredible strides over the years to try to democratize the access to BI. But if you survey the industry as a whole, it turns out that less than 50% of employees inside of organizations are actually using BI solutions and analytics for their day-to-day job. And this is a pretty shocking statistic, given that we are in the data age. So that begs to ask the question, can large language models finally make self-service analytics a reality? That's been the goal for the industry as a whole. And theoretically, large language models should enable us to do that. Why? Because large language models have this incredible capacity of translating natural language into code. But in practice, if you actually do the research and you evaluate the power of the LLMs, the industry and academics have noticed that LLMs are still very far below human performance. So this leaderboard that you see here is a leaderboard that benchmarks the top performing LLMs across the industry. It's called BIRD. And this benchmark, if you will, it has, okay, I wanted to get the data specifically here. It has 12,000 unique SQL to natural language pair questions. It looks at 95 databases across 37 domains. So this is the most representative state-of-the-art SQL, text-to-SQL benchmark to evaluate. And GPT-4, which is the most performing model, can only get about 55% of the time answers correctly, whereas human performers, human data professionals, get them 92% of the time. So the question is, can we trust LLMs if the accuracy is so low? And, you know, we were mentioning the problem of hallucination can be almost a feature if you are using large language models or generative AI for creative use cases. But if you are trying to do business intelligence, if I ask a question like, what is my profit margin this quarter? And you give me a nonsensical answer, the outcome is much more dangerous. So now, let me tell you a little bit about ThoughtSpot and how we have approached large language models and our progress so far. Just to get a sense for the room, how many of you are familiar with ThoughtSpot? How many of you know what ThoughtSpot is? Okay, so we got like about 60% of the audience. Just to very briefly tell you about ThoughtSpot. ThoughtSpot is a BI vendor. We have a BI platform, and we've been around for about 10 years. One of our key differentiators is that ThoughtSpot has always been a search and AI-centric company. Our mission from the get-go was to create a more fact-driven world, and our vision was always to create a BI tool designed for business users and analysts that was as simple as Google to be able to use. Essentially, our vision has always been, can a business user come and ask a question in natural language and get a valuable, accurate, trustable insight back? And how we've done that over the years is we've developed our own natural language processing techniques to build a semantic search engine that has been very powerful. Now, with the advent of LLMs, we've been really able to enrich that experience. Now, so to kind of like walk you through the differences of how a vanilla GPT integration would look like and what we've done at ThoughtSpot. On the left, you can see essentially the integration of what many people will do. Essentially, any startup could do this. You create an experience where it's a text field. The user can enter a prompt, and that the user would ask a question. That question would be sent to GPT with some description of the tables and the metadata in part of a prompt. And then GPT, what it would do is it would translate that natural language question into a SQL statement. And that SQL statement would really work well if you have a very simple data model. It would look very, very nice if that's the case, and it will work great for single flat tables. The output of that would be a number, and in some cases, a visualization that is fully static. But the problem here is, like, if you're an analyst or a data professional, you can truly understand how that was done by like really auditing the SQL that was generated by GPT. But if you're a business user that don't have data fluency or data skills or technical skills, it's very hard for you to trust that insight. Now, enter ThoughtSpot. We've essentially combined our semantic search architecture with the power of GPT. And so how it works is exactly the same. We have a text field or like a conversational experience up top where users can ask questions in natural language. Then we do some intelligent pre-processing and governance checkup before we send any type of data to the large language model. In there, we are going to disambiguate the prompt that the user has done. We will start crafting a very detailed prompt for GPT that already has selected some key columns, some key attributes, some key examples of your existing data set to really enrich what we send to GPT. Then GPT translates all of that into a SQL statement, which we then retranslate into our own semantic DSL, which is a domain-specific language, and I'll show you what that is, but it's essentially an abstraction on top of SQL that is much easier to read. We recompile that in the background to business-ready SQL that has already all of the enforcement around governance. We check a number of things to check the validity of the SQL, and that makes the outcome a little bit more deterministic. And the output of all of that is that we can support highly complex relational schemas, and we have fully interpretable and interactive answers. To wrap everything up, we've attached a feedback loop that enables users to provide feedback to personalize the responses of our large language model over time so that the insights become more accurate. So what does that look like in practice? If I was a worker at Nike, I could ask a simple question like, what are the best performing Nike products in my company this quarter? We would do that whole process that I just explained, and then we would translate that query, if you will, into these search tokens, that's our DSL, that help the user truly understand how the insight was created, which is much more interpretable than doing that reading SQL. I want to give you some tips here to effectively productize LLMs and to assess vendors. This should help you do it as well inside of your organizations. So in my mind and in our experience, there are 5 prerequisites to start your large language model journey for analytics use cases. The first one is you should define your operational principles for LLMs in your organization before you onboard any type of product or if you start building your solution. The second one is that you should outline a data strategy. And in particular, you should think about how to do your test benchmark and proprietary advantage. And don't worry, we're going to go deep diving into each one of these. The third paradigm or the third bullet point here is build for a specific target persona. It's absolutely critical, choosing the right scope and complexity for your first use case, and then finally selecting the right stack for your task. So what were our principles for governance and safety? We had essentially 5 principles. The first one was generative AI results should be highly interpretable. It's a little blurry here, the screenshot, but if you would have seen the demo, what you would have noticed is when we generate an AI answer, we not only showcase the graph, the data, and the numbers, but we also showcase those search tokens that explain to the user how the insight was created. Then the second statement is we needed to give customers and especially analysts the ability to fine-tune the answers that the LLM was giving. So we created a very rich feedback experience that enables professionals inside of your organization to customize and tailor the results that the LLM is given. And this is an example of that UI where inside of the organization, you will release this to business users, but you will have professionals, data professionals like analysts and so on, that will be able to review all of the questions that are being asked, all of the answers that are being generated, and they will be able to monitor and fine-tune and train the output of the LLM for their own specific use case by tailoring the answers themselves, giving it positive, negative feedback, and correcting them where they're wrong. This is incredibly important. This feedback loop is what's helped us move the needle of accuracy from like 50% that GPT gives you to around 80% for production use cases. The third principle is zero data retention. Everybody's super concerned about using third-party LLMs, right? Everybody's scared about sending customer data. Most of our customers are big enterprise customers that are highly regulated in finance, in healthcare. It was a non-starter to use actually GPT provided by OpenAI. So what we had to do is we had to collaborate with vendors of LLMs to build a relationship where there's zero data retention at any point beyond the moment of inference when we send the prompt. The fourth point is also key, which is full control over rollout. And this, I cannot stress enough. We could have GA'd this service and made it immediately available for all customers. But we wanted to allow customers to roll out this at their own pace with their own speed. So we gave them user-level control, data-level permissions, so that they could select who, when, and where could use the functionality. And the fifth element is creating a thoughtful user experience focus on the key personas that you are building for, and we'll talk about that in a second in more detail. The second part is the data strategy, which is creating a testing benchmark and evaluating what proprietary data you have inside of your organization to enrich your use cases. So let's talk about why you need an evaluation benchmark. The evaluation benchmark is going to tell you if the large language model is actually performing with the level of accuracy that you will need. Is this doing an actual good job? And as I mentioned, there are a number of open source benchmarks that exist out there in the world to assess the primary task that we do, which is natural language to SQL. But what we discovered is that these open source data sets are really not representative of enterprise use cases. We had to build our own benchmark because our customers, each one of them have a very specific way of asking questions, very specific taxonomies. So my recommendation to you is, as you are assessing vendors and as you're building your own LLM-powered BI tools one of the primary things is that you should create your ground truth, that golden set of queries that you are going to test against as you onboard these services or you build these predictive machines inside of your product. The second point is, do you have proprietary data to help you build it? In our case, our proprietary data is that we have 10 years of data questions that our customers have been asking out of ThoughtSpot. And so we leverage that customer data to essentially help us understand what is the level of complexity needed and expected to truly be able to meet the requirements around accuracy. Then the second bullet point there is, like, as you saw, we have this big emphasis of empowering analysts to provide feedback to the system. That helps us to continuously integrate and continuously improve the accuracy of the system, which leads me to the third point. The benchmark has to become an internal part of your development cycle. In the early days, as we were building, we would do some changes to the prompt engineering part of the pipeline. We would add some heuristics to our model, and what would happen is we would do 2 steps forwards in terms of accuracy, and we would do 1 step back. What that means is that we would be able to answer some questions that were fairly complex, but then we would start failing on some simpler questions. Now, anytime any of our developers do any type of code changes to the primary part of the pipeline that interacts with the LLM, we run our benchmark, and we look at a number output at the end that says if whether we're increasing the accuracy or not. The second one, or the third point is choosing the right scope. So with LLMs, it's very easy to get excited about solving all sorts of problems because they are very powerful to create demos. But again, it's very hard for them to actually deliver real products. So we could have started immediately building a conversational assistant. That's kind of like one of the easiest choices that you can make. But instead of doing that, we decided to start with single question first and then expand to the chat experience. When we first rolled it out to our initial customers, we limited the size and complexity of the data sets to less than 200 clearly labeled columns, only in English, so that we could set a baseline of accuracy for production-ready use cases. And then we started relaxing those as we saw that the system was performing accurately. We could provide it more examples and so on. So the key insight here for you, whether you're building a BI tool or you're assessing a vendor, is before you roll the LLM into production inside of your organization, select a small, well-defined use case and focus on quality. The fourth one is really building for specific personas. So in our case, we have 2 primary personas that we cater for in ThoughtSpot, the business user and the professional analyst. We also have solutions for data scientists and programmers, which are covered by another product, but for this natural language experience, those were the 2 primary personas. So for the business user, the key was to create an interface that was incredibly easy to create questions and to consume them, and that focus on interpretability. And that chart showcases, as I was mentioning earlier, the real impact that it had in business users, because they started all of a sudden asking so many more questions that they had before. For the analyst persona, who usually steers the data governance inside of an organization, the folks that are entrusted at providing truthful insights inside of organizations, we did not want to ostracize them. We did not want to diminish their impact in the organization. So we created this whole experience that allows them to train the output of the LLM. And now they're the drivers of the truthfulness of the LLM inside of the organization. And here at the bottom, you can kind of see that it's kind of hard to read the numbers, but we've generated 70,000 insights in the last 6 months. And our analysts across the board have provided us feedback for about have corrected at least 7,000 queries, so 10%. You can see the negative rate of predictions is around 9%, which is much better than that 50% gap that you saw with GPT-4 at the beginning of the presentation. What's also very interesting is that they are fixing almost 50% of the answers that they are downvoting. That showcases that indeed there is this desire for data professionals and analysts inside of organizations to interact with these models to improve them. I was very surprised to see this level because usually conversion rates are really not that high. And so the fifth insight here is select the right large language model stack for the task that you're trying to do. The first question that you might ask yourself is, should we train our own models, or should we buy an off-the-shelf model, like, for example, something from OpenAI or Cohere or Anthropic? The primary trade-offs there are going to be around accuracy, latency, privacy, and cost. So if you bring a model in-house and you want to fine-tune it, it's going to be costly, but the value of that is that you are going to have incredible privacy because you will be able to do that on-premise. The cost and latency of models is very variant, but what I wanted to call to your attention is in here you can see that open source models are becoming very powerful. So as we mentioned, GPT-4 right now is kind of state of the art across most benchmarks. The benchmarks that you see there in the left are kind of the primary benchmarks under which LLMs are assessed. And Llama 2, which is Facebook's open source LLM, has incredible performance. You could essentially fork that and install it on premise, and so you are saving a lot of money by essentially productizing those in-house if it works for your task. Now, moving to the second insight here is not every task requires GPT-4. So in our experience, GPT-4 was by far the most accurate of LLMs that we tested. The problem with GPT-4 is that the latency per inference at 95th percentile was taking like about 9 to 10 seconds. And that is simply not production ready. When you ask a question, you want to get an answer right away. So that's a huge problem for us because it's the model that is the most accurate for translating to SQL, but it's also the one that takes the longest. So we were in a big problem there, and what we realized is that we started segmenting the use cases and combining different models for different complexities. So the simple questions that don't require the reasoning capabilities of GPT-4, we sent to GPT 3.5, which is bullet fast and basically provides results within 3 seconds. And for more complex tasks, we started using GPT-4. Another key insight is that we are using caching and async jobs to really expedite the quality of the experience that we provide. When our customers give us feedback, when our customers correct answers that the LLM has provided, we take that as a very high signal and we cache them as results so that anytime a business user inside of the organization asks that same question, we serve that cached answer. And then the final point that I wanted to make was choosing the right vendor. So we talked about how important governance is for enterprises that are assessing LLMs. And for us, one of the primary principles is that there had to be no data retention. So we are actually working with Microsoft OpenAI Cognitive Services. We use the Microsoft implementation because in our experience, they had the best latency and they had the most flexible terms in terms of data retention policy, which was really useful for us. Now we're almost up to time, so here are the key takeaways. Well, the first one is if you want to give us a try, this is completely free. You can go to our booth, 535 for drinks at 5:30. You will be able to get demos there, but you should just try it yourself. If you want to, just take a shot at that QR code. I'm sorry I couldn't show you the demo here in person, but the true key five insights that I wanted to share is, first, you have to define your large language model principles before you roll out your use case and focus on creating a benchmark. The second one is you have to select specific personas that you want to enable before you start your journey. For us, it was the business user and the analyst persona. The third one is before you start getting into a number of use cases, really try to identify the smallest use case that you can tackle, measure the accuracy of that task, and then expand and roll out to more users and more complexity in terms of use case. The fourth one that is differentiate with proprietary data. Can you use your proprietary data inside of your products, inside of your organization to build an incredible benchmark and create a moat for yourself? And the fifth point is find the right size large language model stack for you. You could choose to do something open source or simply using something off the shelf. There's all sorts of solutions available there for you. Now, we have 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes. We can open up the questions for anybody who has a question. Go ahead, sir. Do you want to give them the mic?
Thank you. You mentioned about these models, the LLMs are probabilistic. so what we get is not consistent.
Yeah.
And have you had this problem in the dashboard when with the same question you get different answers when you try again?
Yes. So his question for the broader audience was, LLMs are not deterministic. You ask it a question one time, it's going to give you one answer. Then you ask it that same question 10 minutes later or another person, and it gives you a different answer. How have you solved that problem? How we've solved that problem is by implementing this feedback loop inside of the solution. When our customers gives us thumbs up or thumbs downs and correct it, we actually persist. That is essentially a validation. We cache that answer, and so we start serving that answer deterministically all of the time. The second thing that helps us be more deterministic is that we are not using the SQL that GPT gives us. If you remember in one of the earlier slides, we translated into our own DSL, which helps us to basically correct it, clean it, add some more things, and then we recompile to our own SQL, which then does the query to the CDW. And therefore, we can ensure a little bit more determinism. I think I shared the statistic, but right now we are seeing, at least for the customers that we've enabled, around 78 to 80% accuracy for those customers that have enabled it. They're not using the most advanced, complex use cases inside of the organizations. So, I'm not claiming here that we solve it and we don't have any hallucinations or anything like that. But what I can tell you is that the feedback loop that we've created and that differentiator of the semantic search in the center helps us have much more deterministic answers than just hitting directly the LLM. I guess a key insight here is that you should think about the LLM just as a new part of any architecture. How do you integrate that new part of the architecture across the rest of your architecture to make it more deterministic is kind of like the big question that companies are going to have to solve. Thank you for your question. Second question over there. I can hear you. Woo.
Thank you. Do you see this product as a standalone product or more as a companion tool to your broader solution?
So this product is completely embedded in the ThoughtSpot UI. It's essentially when you land in our homepage, it's there. So it's part of our entire BI solution. If your question is, do you see ThoughtSpot as being an end-to-end experience for all analytics use cases? Typically, our customers will have a combination of products, but our solution is this solution that you saw here is really the one they use to democratize, to essentially cater for the business user and the analyst. For data scientists and programmers, they will usually complement with something else. In our case, we just recently acquired Mode, which provides that like SQL-rich editor experience for more technical personas. So, and now we're integrating Mode and ThoughtSpot, but that's not currently available in production, as it were. But this is definitely a complement. I think we have... Oh, no, that's it. Thank you so much, folks. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of the conference.